August 7th, 1945. Across the world, newspapers arrived with a headline that seemed almost impossible. A single bomb had wiped out most of a city in Japan. Americans sipped coffee as the word atomic entered breakfast conversations, while British and Soviet headlines called it a new era of war. Yet beyond the official reports and hurried estimates, there was confusion, shock, and a silent fear that no one could yet explain. What did it really feel like to wake up on the first morning after Hiroshima? Dawn on August 7th, 1945, brought a quiet that felt heavier than usual. In American cities, the first light crept through kitchen windows, glinting off half-empty coffee cups and the polished handles of delivery carts. The hum of a distant milk truck faded into the background as a paperboy's bicycle tires whispered over damp sidewalks. In rural towns, horse-drawn wagons rattled along gravel roads, their drivers wrapped in the last chill of night, dropping bundles of newsprint at corner stores and front porches. Radios crackled softly in the background, replaying bulletins from the previous afternoon and night. On the West Coast, stations had rebroadcast the War Department's statement between 2 and 4 p.m. Pacific time, but now, as the sun rose, only the static and clipped voices of early morning announcers filled the air. Most listeners heard phrases they'd already heard, repeated with the same careful, official tone. The newscasters read from scripts, their words shaped by the same wire reports that would soon fill every newspaper column. Inside homes, the world was still half asleep. Some families gathered at kitchen tables, waiting for the rattle of the news at the door. Others lingered over breakfast, letting the radio provide a steady, familiar background. There was no rush, just the slow unfolding of a day that, on the surface, looked like any other. In small towns, the postmaster might be the first to break the silence, stacking fresh editions behind the counter as a few early risers shuffled in, nodding quietly to one another. Across the Atlantic, the first editions of British papers landed on stoops in London and Manchester, their ink barely dry. In Moscow, the morning brought the usual routine, with Pravda's bundles arriving by truck in the blue-gray haze before sunrise. The streets were subdued, the tempo of daily life unchanged, even as something extraordinary waited behind the front page. Brief moment before headlines were unfolded and the new word, atomic, entered the room. There was only the faint hiss of radio static, the steady clop of hooves, and the soft shuffle of feet on morning floors. The world held its breath, not yet knowing what awaited in the newsprint about to be spread across kitchen tables and shop counters. In the hours after sunrise, the first wave of American newspapers landed on doorsteps and counters, each front page carrying a headline that tried to capture the scale of what had happened in Hiroshima. The New York Times printed the words in bold: "New weapon used in Japan war. Atom bomb hits Hiroshima. 60,000 dead." The banner stretched across the top, above columns that repeated the War Department's official account almost word for word. Reports described a single bomb that destroyed a city, a weapon many times deadlier than any other bomb ever known, and a stunned Japanese government reeling from the attack. The editorial page declared, "A new weapon has been unleashed," and beneath the headlines, the language was measured, technical details, casualty estimates, and a careful reliance on government statements. On the West Coast, the Los Angeles Times filled its front page with the story, but the layout reflected a city still balancing the shock with the routines of daily life. The main headline read, "Atom bomb hits Hiroshima, Japs stunned." A subhead explained, "Superweapon kills thousands, levels city." The coverage quoted President Truman, "It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe." Columnist John J. McCloy described a force of unprecedented destructive power, echoing the sense of awe that ran through the day's reporting. The language was direct, but the details remained thin. No photographs from Hiroshima, no eyewitness accounts, only the official narrative and the first estimates of devastation. In Chicago, The Sun ran its own headline, "Atomic bomb hits Jap city, thousands killed." The front page included a series of stories, among them "Story of Our Secret Weapon" and "Scientists Tell of Watching First Blast." Steel towers vaporized, cloud rises 8 miles. The subheads mixed horror and triumph, calling the bomb the last word in horror, and the weapon to end all wars. The stories credited the information to United Press and War Department communiques, with little independent reporting. William L. Lawrence, a science writer for the New York Times and the only journalist embedded with the Manhattan Project, shaped much of the language that appeared in these stories. His descriptions of the bomb's harnessed power and the force from which the sun draws its energy were echoed in nearly every major paper, carried by wire services from coast to coast. Across all three papers, the headlines and lead stories followed the same pattern: official copy, cautious estimates, and a tone that blended scientific marvel with military necessity. The details were astonishing, but the picture was incomplete. Readers confronted a new vocabulary: atomic, fission, unprecedented power, without yet knowing what those words would mean for the world beyond this first morning. Across the United Kingdom, the first morning papers carried headlines that echoed the language filtering out of Washington, yet with a tone shaped by British restraint and experience. The Times of London led with "Atomic Bomb, a New Era of War," its headline stretching across the page in stark type. The lead story relied on official statements, describing a weapon many times more powerful than any previously known, and repeated the War Office's measured line that the bomb was a decisive development in the conduct of war. Editorials in the Daily Herald spoke of the end of conflict arriving with a new weapon, while the Manchester Guardian selected phrases like "astonishing destructive power" and "scientific achievement," careful not to stray beyond the boundaries of what was publicly confirmed. On the airwaves, the BBC Early Morning Bulletin opened with Geoffrey Cox reading from a Ministry of Information script. His voice, clipped and even, told listeners that the Allies had unleashed a force from which the sun draws its power. The bulletin described the event as the dawn of a new era, but gave few details beyond the scale of the blast and the official hope that Japan would now surrender. Listeners heard the phrase "atomic bomb" repeated, often without further explanation, and the coverage was punctuated by the same uncertainty found in the papers. No eyewitness accounts, no images from the city, only the language of officialdom and the weight of something unprecedented. In Canada, the Toronto Star's front page headline declared, "Hiroshima, city destroyed by new weapon." The story beneath repeated United States estimates of 70,000 killed and described the bomb as developed by Allied scientists in collaboration with Canadian and British research. Prime Minister Mackenzie King addressed the nation that evening, calling for a solemn acknowledgement of the power now at our disposal. His words, broadcast over the CBC, reflected both pride in Canada's role and a sober recognition that the world had crossed into unknown territory. Australian newspapers, arriving on breakfast tables in Sydney and Melbourne, framed the event with a sense of distance, but also relief. The Sydney Morning Herald led with "New Bomb Shatters War," and the accompanying article quoted a Department of Information bulletin describing the weapon as a new instrument of peace-enforcing force. There was talk of the bomb's potential to hasten the end of fighting in the Pacific, a hope that resonated in a country still marked by years of war and the threat of invasion. Editorials in the Australian press focused on the scale of destruction and the scientific marvel, but, like their British and Canadian counterparts, avoided speculation about the bomb's inner workings or long-term consequences. Throughout the Commonwealth, the language of headlines and official statements moved quickly from one capital to the next. The phrasing "new era," "decisive development," "city destroyed" was almost uniform, shaped by the same wire reports and government memos that guided American coverage. Each newspaper and broadcast repeated the facts as they were known: a city leveled, a new weapon revealed, and a world confronted with something it could barely comprehend. Yet beneath the surface, the tone varied. British sobriety, Canadian solemnity, Australian relief, each reflecting a nation's own experience of war and alliance. The morning's news spoke of unity, but the words carried the first hints of questions that would linger long after the headlines faded. Moscow, the morning of August 7, unfolded with a quiet that masked careful attention behind the scenes. Pravda, the official newspaper of the Communist Party, arrived across the city with a headline that read simply, "A new weapon has appeared." The article beneath credited American scientific achievement, repeating the sparse details released by Washington. There was no speculation about the bomb's inner workings, only a measured recounting of what U.S. officials had claimed: a single device, unprecedented in power, had destroyed a Japanese city. Soviet radio news at 10 a.m. local time echoed the same theme: describing the event as a decisive, strategic shift in the war. The language was precise, almost clinical. Reports acknowledged that the weapon was American and that its destructive force was unmatched, but they offered no hint of alarm or condemnation. Instead, the coverage reflected a careful calculation, an awareness that the balance of power had changed, but a refusal to reveal any sense of surprise or vulnerability. In official statements and editorials, the tone was restrained, hinting at the need to study this new development without betraying the urgency felt within the Kremlin's walls. The Soviet press did not dwell on casualty figures or the human cost. Instead, the focus remained on the implications for global strategy. Pravda's editorial noted the emergence of a new era in warfare, but the article's brevity left many questions unanswered. There was no mention of radiation, no speculation about the bomb's construction, and no commentary on the morality of its use. The coverage reflected both the limits of available information and the priorities of a government determined to project calm in the face of American technological dominance. In Japan, the flow of information was even more tightly controlled. Chugoku Shimbun, Hiroshima's regional newspaper, managed to publish a single line: "City of Hiroshima suffered extensive damage." The devastation in the city itself made reporting nearly impossible. Communications were crippled, and military censors reviewed every word that reached the public. National newspapers offered only the briefest acknowledgement of the attack, referring to a special bomb and describing the event as an air raid. There were no photographs, no eyewitness accounts, and no mention of the bomb's true nature. The Japanese government's official line called for calm and perseverance, even as the scale of destruction remained unclear to most civilians. Across Asia, news of Hiroshima filtered through with delays and uncertainty. In China and Korea, wartime censorship and disrupted communications meant that only fragments of the story reached the public. Reports relied on Allied radio broadcasts and translated wire stories, often stripped of detail and context. The language was tentative, marked by phrases like "reportedly" and "alleged," as editors struggled to piece together the facts from a distance. On this first morning, the world's understanding of Hiroshima remained incomplete. In the Soviet Union, the headlines reflected strategic calculation. In Japan, the news was a whisper, shaped by devastation and silence. Across the region, the story of the bomb was still only beginning to unfold. As readers unfolded their newspapers on August 7, 1945, the words on the page reflected only what could be confirmed. The War Department's official announcement, printed nearly verbatim in every major American paper, delivered the core facts with deliberate clarity. 16 hours ago, an American airplane met no opposition over the city of Hiroshima and dropped one bomb on it. The bomb was equivalent to some 20,000 tons of TNT and destroyed its target completely. This is the greatest single act of destruction ever recorded in history. No other weapon ever approached it in destructive power. Reports described Hiroshima as a major military supply base and port of embarkation, emphasizing its strategic value. The statement continued, "Approximately 60% of the city was destroyed." No photographs accompanied these lines, only the stark authority of official language. The phrase, "the force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East," appeared in bold, echoing across columns and editorials. The bomb's effects were described as blast and heat, with comparisons to the largest conventional bombs. It had more than 2,000 times the blast power of the British Grand Slam, which is the largest bomb yet used in the history of warfare. Early casualty estimates varied, but the number most widely quoted that morning was 60,000 dead. Some headlines rounded higher, others used the phrase "thousands killed." But the figure of 60,000, drawn from initial reconnaissance and relayed through wire services, became the reference point for understanding the scale. The destruction radius, though not always specified in exact terms, was reported as more than 5 square miles leveled, a city center obliterated in a single instant. What was known came almost entirely from these official sources. The details were astonishing, but confined to what the War Department and President Truman's office had chosen to share. The facts, one bomb, one city, 60,000 lives, stood alone on the page, offering a clear but incomplete picture of what had taken place. Almost every headline on August 7 carried a sense of certainty, but the columns beneath revealed how little was truly understood. Reports described the bomb as a force beyond comparison, yet the technical explanations stopped at the edge of the familiar. Editors leaned on phrases like "still being evaluated," "believed to have destroyed," or "reportedly leveled the city." These words signaled that even the most authoritative voices were working from incomplete information. Scientists quoted in the press spoke of atomic fission and the release of energy, but their statements came with careful qualifiers. The mechanics of the weapon were outlined in broad strokes: splitting the atom, harnessing the power of the universe. But the deeper consequences remained outside the public's grasp. Absent from the newsprint was any mention of radiation or its effects. Nowhere in the War Department's statements, nor in the early dispatches from correspondents, did the word appear. The destruction was measured in blast and heat, in square miles and estimated deaths, but not in invisible dangers. The stories described an explosion many times more powerful than any bomb yet used, but the aftermath was imagined only in terms of fire and rubble. Even the most detailed accounts, like those from William L. Lawrence, avoided speculation about lingering harm. The official line, echoed in every major paper, focused on what could be seen from the air or calculated from photographs. The language of the morning reflected a world groping for understanding. Terms like "new weapon," "unprecedented power," and "city destroyed" appeared again and again, but always with the shadow of uncertainty. Readers encountered a picture that was astonishing and yet incomplete, an event that outpaced the words used to describe it. The gaps in knowledge were as striking as the facts themselves, leaving the public to wonder what, exactly, had happened in Hiroshima and what it might mean for the days ahead. The world woke to headlines it could barely comprehend, and that uncertainty still echoes. Today, more than 12,500 nuclear warheads remain on alert worldwide. The first reports from Hiroshima remind us every new threshold of power arrives before its consequences are understood. We still live in the shadow of that morning's unknowns. What we choose to see or ignore shapes the world we inherit. Share your thoughts below.